Seawright is running the water school at Pearson's Bridge near Kealkil, the school his late father built to share his love of water with others. He spoke to me recently about his love of all things water-based and continuing his father Clive's incredible legacy. So hi Ciarán. So Ciarán, tell me about your first memory of water.
Hi, Siobhán. That's actually a really tricky question to answer because I was trying to think about it, and for as long as I can remember, water has been in my life somehow. Um, Even though when I was a kid, I grew up kind of in the mountains and we couldn't see the sea. I always had a fascination with playing with the streams and the puddles around me, and my brother was always damming up ponds, so there was always water around. And my father obviously was always bringing me to the water and just helped instill that kind of love for it in me.
And when did you learn to swim then?
So my father used to bring my older sister horse riding lessons in Mamway, and he would bring me to the Mamway swimming pool during that time and start teaching me how to swim. And which, funny enough, is also what kickstarted him as a swimming teacher. But he started me off swimming there, but I wouldn't let go of my float. And my overriding memory is actually holding onto my float in one of the dams that my brother had built near my own house. And I didn't want to let go of it until my dad offered me a snorkel and told me there was fish in the bottom of the pond. So I handed him the float, I put the snorkel on, and I've been chasing fish ever since. Um, it's always one of my favorite things to do.
So snorkeling, is it, or do you dive as well?
Snorkeling, just getting in under the water, and even with a pair of goggles or no goggles, and just swimming after fish. So I suppose I was about the age of 4 or 5 when that happened, and I haven't really been able to get out of the water for too long since.
And so you made it a career. So when did you realize that this was something that was going to become more than a hobby for you?
Um, so like I was saying, I've always been in the water, and my father got me involved in life saving as well, going over to the Manway on the Tuesday evening and training up through all the water safety modules, finishing off Rescue 2, Rescue 3. And when I was 15, he I was working in the office there for him while he was running swimming lessons, and one of the teachers got sick. Short notice, I had to stand in and take a class. When I was 15, I think there was about 10 or 12 kids in there, and I just had to make do and get on with it. And I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. And then I kept at it, and I suppose he kind of got me involved in it to help keep me out of trouble because I wasn't the best behaved teenager in the world. And keeping me swimming kind of helped give me a little bit of a focus and a bit of direction, and it helped me maintain fitness as well because I've had ongoing health problems throughout my life. So swimming has always been a way of maintaining fitness and strength when it's been challenged at times.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I suppose I fell in love with it as a career because it gave me a fantastic opportunity to work with people. People are fun, they're entertaining, they're different, they keep you on your toes. And it was a way of being involved and actually helping to be a positive impact in someone else's life and doing something that you walked away with going, I did good today. That was satisfying.
And did you go straight from school into that then, Ciarán?
So while I was being a troublesome teenager in school, I was also working part-time on the weekends teaching swimming. After I finished school, I actually went to Kinsale. I did outdoor pursuits there. So I was training in sailing, windsurfing, whitewater kayaking, sea kayaking, rock climbing, you name it. If it was fun and adventurous, I was doing it. And I fell in love with the kayaking, where obviously my ability in the water helped me out an awful lot. Because if I capsized, I was um, dangerously relaxed, I think was the term that was
Yeah,
used.
exactly.
And I moved away. I didn't stick with that for very long. Well, I've kept that at it, but the swimming teaching has always been the main element within my life, I suppose.
And so
That's
you're running the water school now, but also you are still instructing, I presume. So you have a good idea of how men and women vary in the water, and I think it's something that on this podcast we've spoken a lot about, and at a recent we had a live podcast there in Bandon during the festival there in October, and we spoke about how women are kind of better designed for swimming. So is that something you've noticed in the water, or even attitudes? Are they different between men and women?
There are certainly differences, but there's also quite a lot of similarities as well. And I've been I've been teaching swimming now for the bones of 20 years. So I've come across quite a lot of different people. And I was actually just listening to that podcast just to refresh my memory because one of the teachers that works here, Dominique, had had mentioned it to me. So I must listen to that now. And there were some fantastic points in there. Certainly in terms of physiology, women can be better adapted and suited to the water. But then there's the flip side on that, that actually men's longer arm reach and larger hands, larger feet mean that they have greater propulsion and power within the water. Differences
Yeah, so maybe
between
men
them. But
are more powerful, but women have more endurance.
I would agree with that 100%. Um, and then, of course, men tend to be denser. Uh, we're physiologically designed to be denser, so we have a heavier bone structure, which means that if we float at all, we float more on the vertical, whereas women will float on the horizontal.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a generalization, so
Hmm.
sometimes you will see the crossover in that. Every once in a while, I get women in the pool, and they're floating on the vertical more or at a slight angle, and it turns out they're very keen runners, walkers, cyclists. They've developed a heavier, more dense bone and muscle structure in their lower legs,
Okay. That's
and that's
interesting.
altered their physiology in their water.
Mm. And
Um,
yeah, go ahead.
in terms of approach, I tend to find that women will tend to beat themselves down more. They'll say, "Oh no, I'm not very good at this," which is a shame because actually, quite often, they take in the instruction very quickly. Whereas men will say, "Yes, I can do that,"
But they can't.
even when they can sometimes, but sometimes the confidence carries them through.
Mm.
So
That's
I've
a
known
reflection of life, I think, you're on, rather than just
it
swimming.
really is. And that's one of the things I love about swimming is that you can really, it's a philosophy for life.
Mm.
And you see people and how they treat life in the water.
Yeah.
So that's what, and then of course, men will tend to try and rush over to the other side.
Yes.
So whenever I get beginners, and sometimes it's men or women, their aim is to get from one side to the other because there's a slight sense of panic or fear there.
Mm.
And they just want to make it from one side to the other and go, I'm safe.
As quickly as
My biggest
possible.
challenge,
Mm.
exactly, my biggest challenge there is to slow them down and get them to enjoy the process. So they're actually enjoying swimming
Yeah.
and then
And
they're able to swim better.
on the technique which you kind of touch on there, the first time I realized that you were quite a skillful instructor, I went over for my first swim in the water school, and I think I was in the water about 10 seconds, and you stopped me and you said, "Do you normally swim in a wetsuit?" And I said, "Yes." And you said, "Oh yeah, I thought that." And I was so impressed because I didn't realize there was such a difference. So obviously there are different techniques too between, pool swimmers and open water swimmers, and something that us mere mortals don't spot, but you obviously have fine-tuned that little nugget. So tell me a little bit about that.
Thank
How
you
they hit
very
you.
much. Thank you very much on that. I suppose long years of watching people swim, both within a pool environment, which obviously I've done a lot of, but I've also taught a lot in the sea as well. And you do notice the difference between them. So people will tend to float higher in the sea than they do in fresh water. And that the seawater will affect, especially they'll keep their heads up and their feet will float up to the surface more. So if they're swimming breaststroke, say, they may not be used to getting as much power from their legs and they're overly reliant on their arms. Whereas breaststroke, 90% of the power should be coming from the legs. That can be an immediate giveaway sometimes.
Mm.
And it can be easier than to swim front crawl in salt water, where your arms are doing most of the work and your legs are trailing behind you.
Now, another thing, I think that you're very involved too with schools there. So, like, do you think that we should be teaching more swimming at primary level with our children?
100%. We have about 20 to 28 different primary schools coming to us throughout the year for lessons now, which is fantastic.
Mm.
And it is part of the national curriculum that they must be provided with swimming lessons within their time at school. But I don't think there's enough emphasis being placed on it. Some schools might only bring one class, 1 year, and then not for another couple of years.
Right.
So there's lots of children who are not gaining enough access to the water, and they're not progressing fast enough through it, through lack of exposure. There is a scarily high number of drownings in the world. Somewhere between 235,000 and 320,000 people drown a year worldwide.
Accidental, I
In the
presume, is
US,
falling off things and getting out of their depth, is it?
that's it. And drowning is the leading cause of accidental death for 1 to 4-year-old children.
Gosh, didn't know that.
That's it. I
Very
mean,
frightening.
just in Ireland alone, in 2023, there were 78 drownings throughout the whole Ireland. Now that was including all age ranges. Unfortunately, males tend to be twice as likely to drown as females, and quite often that might come down to going in to rescue a child.
Okay. Okay. I thought
So
it might be risk. They'd be more likely to take risks as well, but
we are less risk averse, I will agree. And we are certainly more prone to showing off, certainly as teenagers. And we will ignore the fact that, oh yeah, I can't really swim, but that girl's kind of pretty, so I'm going to jump in right now and show off.
I'm
Doesn't
worried about
always
it
work out
later.
so well. Exactly, exactly. So the more children that will receive good quality swimming lessons from an early age, the better, because that will have a knock-on effect later on in life.
For sure.
The Irish water safety motto is every person a swimmer, every swimmer a lifesaver. And that's something that we at the water school really follow as well.
Right. And just at the water school, now your father passed away recently, Clive. He was a fantastic man. I had a few lovely conversations with him about swimming. And tell me a little bit about his vision for the water school because it is quite unusual, the way it's set up, and even the fact it's in quite a remote area. But the water itself is unusual. So tell us a little bit about that for those who don't know about it.
Of course. Yes, only yesterday I was talking to a fisherman who was coming over to do sea survival training within the pool that we run as part of with BIM. And he actually said he thought he was having a psychotic episode, being only a couple miles from Gugambara in the back, in the in the backwoods in a swimming pool in someone's backyard. So yes, we are in an unusual position. But when my father set it up, he very much wanted to be able to provide a service where we were able to teach swimming and not use chlorinated water. Chlorine should have nothing to do with the human body at all. It's a toxic substance. And we actually use a ionization UV filtration system, which means we rely on titanium and copper. And now we actually have silver involved in the system as well. So after it goes through the ground glass filters, it goes through a UV chamber that kills everything, any bacteria or viruses on contact, and then it goes through titanium, copper, and silver chambers, which help to ionize and oxidize the water, which means that the water itself actually feels more like silk. Chlorine and salt water tend to feel slightly sticky on the skin
Mm. And dry,
because
yeah.
they are literally leaving a residue on you.
Mm.
The ionization system actually means that it's very aerated. It's a lot less dense, so people don't float as well in it. So they actually learn to keep themselves up more, but you come out feeling cleaner. It's the same kind of system that is used by various cities around the world to clean their drinking water.
Okay. And is it
So if it
unique
wasn't for the, it's not unique. We
in
are, but
in Ireland even, or
we
Munster?
are almost unique within Ireland. There is still a heavy emphasis on using chlorine and in some places salinated water as well.
And was it a very expensive system to install? Do you know, Siobhán?
Don't have the figures at hand
Mm.
now, um, but initially it was more expensive to set up than chlorine, partly because we actually had to import the parts from South Africa because I think there was no company at the time that were closer that could provide what we were looking for. But over time, that's actually paid off because it looks after the machinery and the structure of the pool a lot better. So chlorine by now would have started causing damage to the steel structure of the pool building, whereas you don't see any of that from the ionization system. Also,
Right.
none of the plumbing have suffered because of it.
Mm. It's fascinating, and it's such a pity that there isn't more of that, like you say, and that we rely
That's
so
it.
much on chemicals.
We get an awful lot of customers come to us even just for the lack of chlorine because it is better for things like emphysema, for skin complaints, psoriasis especially. Um, so people really appreciate being able to swim in that kind of water. And then obviously we try and deliver the best quality instruction that we can do as well from passionate instructors.
That's for sure, and I'm testament to that because I've enjoyed some of them giving me
Thank you.
fantastic instruction over the years, and also I also know that you've helped out down at the sea, I suppose you could say, from Kealkil down at the shore with some other swimmers. You're a great support, I think, to some of the women down there at Snoff, giving them little tips, and what I was wondering was, do you think that there is an untapped potential in West Cork as regards swimming, as in
How do you mean?
tourism and in the sea now, tourism activities?
I think there certainly could be. I'm sure there is an untapped potential within West Cork for a type of sea tourism, swimming tourism. But I think that's also part of the charm of West Cork is that it's not overly developed on that, and that you can go to places and have it almost to yourself and not feel like it's being spoiled. I know that there's a couple of fantastic coaches in and around the place who do deliver quality instruction for people who want to go for a swim in the sea, who want to help develop themselves as triathletes or open water swimmers, or even just want someone to keep an eye on them as they say swim around Garnish Island. Um, so I think that's being looked after in a very niche way. But I suppose I'd be hesitant on saying we need to develop this even more.
Right.
Part of the charm is its wildness.
Mm. And speaking of that, can you let us in on a few of your favorite locations for swimming? That doesn't give too much
Um,
away.
I now live down on the Sheep's Head, so I swim keenly down in Akista certainly during the summer, whenever other opportunities arise. There's some beautiful spots around there,
Mm.
and Kilkerhan can be a fantastic place to swim if you're being safe about it. You still need to check the tides and check the weather because there can be some bad currents. There are lots of other little pockets around the place, which I'd almost encourage people just to discover them for themselves because I'd hate to step on someone's toes and
Yeah.
give a secret away on that one.
And if you were swimming abroad or going away for a holiday, Kieran, do you bear in mind somewhere you can swim when you're going?
Always. The longest I ever went without swimming was about 6 months while I was living in Spain.
Well, that's very
And I
long.
was living inland
Mm.
and I was over winter and eventually I realized there was a spot in the river down the mountain where I could go for a swim. Although the locals did think I was crazy because it was March at that point,
Freezing.
but I needed to get into the water. So
Mm.
I will always factor in where I can swim. And I've been very lucky to have been able to swim in quite a few different wonderful spots around the world. Um, Places like parts of the Amazon in the Pacific, different parts of Mediterranean. Um, Once even in a glaciated lake high up in the Andes,
Wow.
which I think I actually bounced out faster than I got in. It was so cold.
And just before we finish, some thoughts on continuing your father's legacy. And I presume that was one of the deciding factors in you keeping on the water school and running it now, that you wanted to keep his vision alive, I suppose, really.
100%. Um, he developed the place with a real love and passion for teaching people to swim and introducing them to the love of water. And that obviously rubbed off on me because I love being able to help people overcome a fear and enjoy the water the way they should be able to and safely. Currently, I am just getting to grips with the running of the place because I'm used to being an instructor, but not always the manager. But down the line, I would love to be able to see the water school method of teaching being taken further than just bantry and helping to bring everyone to the love of water, or at least the competency within water as well.
Well, that would be a wonderful legacy of your father's interest in the sea to keep going. So that would be fantastic. So thank you so much for joining me today, Kieran. I really, really enjoyed our chat.
My pleasure, Siobhán. Thank you for having me on.
Not at all. Thanks for listening to the Southern Stars from A to C podcast series. This episode was produced and presented by Southern Star editor Siobhán Cronin and edited by Tony O'Shaughnessy. For stories like this and more, visit southernstar.ie/podcasts, where you can swim through previous episodes with people like underwater cameraman Ken O'Sullivan, the men behind the Fastnet Swim, and the Swimming Women of Iceland. And be sure to pick up a copy of this Thursday's newspaper in shops across West Cork or online via southernstar.ie/subscribe. Please rate, review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to make sure you don't miss any future episodes. And thanks for listening.